What follows is a story that has been 30 years in the making. This is a cut and paste of reminiscences and myths from a bunch of surviving indie rock troubadours, who together created a collective rock and roll demo as a series of sessions recorded at the Sound Cafe near Edinburgh in the early 1990s. The plan, in the autumn of 1991, was to release a compilation album, a snapshot of the live music scene and a sample of the most talented indie bands gigging across Scotland in the early 90s. It was never released, however, and as the years passed, the master tapes were abandoned, finally lost. Or so it was thought. Astonishingly, at the start of 2020, a version of all the original mixes was uncovered, still perfectly preserved at the back of a cupboard in the bottom of a cardboard box. Dusted down, digitally remastered, those long hidden songs have been lovingly restored and repackaged as The Lost Cafe Sessions. This new album of rediscovered sessions is now available across all digital streaming platforms, and all the revenue pennies, and we do mean pennies, will be donated to the charity Siblings Reunited. This is the abridged story from many of the musicians involved and their recollections of the original sessions. The times on the road, travelling in transit vans and playing venues the length and breadth of Scotland across the 1990s. All of the interviews were recorded using Zoom during the COVID pandemic lockdown, and some of what follows is even possibly true. What has become the Lost Cafe Sessions started out as the brainchild of two entrepreneurial types from Fife, Jim Russell and Ian Harrower, who had met through the local live music scene, and that friendship eventually led to the formation of a promotions, music management and PA hire company, Smithfield Entertainments. Ian Harrower, Smithfield Entertainments.
I played in a sort of blues rock band. And Jim Russell managed a rock band called Roy G. Biv, and I played in a band called Dead Reckoning. So our kind of paths met, and we ended up the two bands kind of doing gigs together. And I was slightly older than Jim, but I just kind of. When you kind of just recognise somebody's got talent when you kind of meet them, and then Jim just kind of stood out right off with that, and then we kind of hit it off. So that kind of began the journey, and then that led to the idea that we would set up this, because we'd been doing it with the two bands anyway, we decided maybe we could do it in a slightly larger platform, that we would begin to promote gigs with other bands. So that was the kind of idea of Smithfield Entertainments.
The concept to produce an album and create a record label of their very own appeared to be a natural progression. Jim Russell, Smithfield Entertainments.
I think the whole project, from me first starting with Roy G. Biv and Dead Reckoning through the various different projects we worked at, there's probably a 2.5 or 3 year period, and it kind of migrated onto a whole load of different projects. We worked on something called Fife Rock at Crystal's Arena, and I guess our profile was increasing and our exposure to people within the Scottish music industry was also increasing. And as we did that, there was never kind of like a eureka moment. It was more, we started organizing gigs and they were bigger and bigger and more successful, and we had more bands. And I guess one of the key things was meeting up with Dave Gray, who recorded some demo tracks for some of the bands, and having access to a talented sound engineer with a recording studio in, relatively close by, kind of sparked that that whole project going forward.
With their reputation growing, the boys tapped into a hugely popular live music sponsorship initiative organised by world-famous Glasgow brewer Tennent's. The Tennent's live music sponsorship campaign revitalised the Scottish music scene, and this created opportunities for Smithfield Entertainment and working with musicians much further afield than their Fife base. Vincent Swan, Purblind Panic.
There wasn't really a scene in Dublin per se, and that actually was one of the things that made me want to move to Edinburgh, move to the UK. I didn't really want to move to London, but the quality of bands in the UK was much higher because of that, because there were stages to play on.
Life was tough for up-and-coming bands, and getting gigs was punishingly hard work. A good demo tape was essential. Andy Jeffries, Tom's New Shoes.
I was just determined at that time to play anywhere that would let me get on a stage. You had to literally go with a bag of cassette tapes around pubs and venues, find the guy who ran it, persuade him not to kick you out and say, take this tape. I mean, I remember handing the tapes to people and saying, have a listen to that, it's awesome. And they'd look at it and go, throw it over their shoulder. One of them was Evan Dando from the Lemonheads, actually. And it was one of my favourite bands, and I thought, you're not my favourite band now, you twat, throwing my demo over your shoulder. He wasn't interested, he just wanted to know if I had drugs or not, and I didn't, so he didn't want to talk to me.
There was a hustle involved in trying to find a stage to play upon in a back room or the basement in a dark and smelly bar with dubious electrics and sticky carpets. From Dumfries to Drumnard Rocket, getting and promoting the gigs, practicing, driving, unloading, setting up, playing the gig, then packing up and driving home in the wee small hours of the morning was what you did. This was how you paid your dues, learned to play, connect with an audience and become tighter working musicians. And of course, there just might be a record company A&R exec lurking in the crowd on any given night. Steve Brown, Seeing Red.
Yeah, with that demo, I was kind of sending out, as you do, try and get a record deal. That was back in the days when record deals were like, that's what you wanted to go for. But meanwhile, with the help of Smithfield, we were just gigging every weekend as much as we could, just out there doing the job and hoping. And then, yeah, we did a couple of showcases, one at Madison's in Edinburgh. So we did a showcase there and we got a couple of record labels along. Muff Winwood from CBS, he was out to see us. But nobody bite. We didn't get any bites. So we just carried on doing our own thing.
Dave Cunningham, Silent Falls.
Because at the time, the only way to get yourself out there was demo tapes. So it was really hard to get a demo tape and get the money together and stuff like that. And Hancock, he had access to a photocopier, so he was on PR.
Clive McDougall, Blue on Shock.
We were fortunate that the recording studios that we used to record our demos were affordable enough for us to get this massive backlog of catalogue of demos. But for sure, we were definitely a hard-working band, and by that I mean hard-working musically and in administrative capacity. We were out there doing stuff, chasing gigs.
An existing relationship with the sound engineer Dave Gray, who owned and ran the Sound Cafe recording studio in Pennycook near Edinburgh, meant that the recording project had a creative and geographical centre, and all at reasonable day rates. Dave Gray, the Sound Cafe.
I don't know if you remember the setup, but my control room here isn't huge, but the actual live room was only about twice as big as this control room. And there was really no separation. I had a couple of sort of homemade screens and had the central heating boiler was actually in the studio, which is great. So, in the middle of a session, it would suddenly cut in. And then my dad would have a habit of letting himself in with a key and coming down in the middle of the session. And all you'd hear was, "Hello, boys, how are you getting on?" And our voice was, "Dave, I think that's your dad." So, it was all pretty laid back in those days.
The Smithfield plan was to work with the bands who wrote the most promising songs, and this mysterious, perhaps mystical craft turned out to be at the beating heart of all the bands who went on to take part in the sessions. Andy Jeffries, Tom's New Shoes.
I think it was the only band I've ever been in where 3 people were writing songs. A lot of bands I've been in, and the band I'm in now, it's kind of collaborative. You do a bit of jamming, you record it, you keep one bit, you chuck another bit, put it together. But three of us each used to write complete songs, bring them to the band and say, it goes like this. And we'd choose the favourite songs out of all of that. And so that was fun. It was pretty fertile. We never recorded half of the stuff that we actually did together. But I think we did maybe 3 different sessions with Dave Gray out in Pennycook when the Sound Cafe was in his basement. And the first one was probably the spring of 1990. And the last one was about the middle of 91. And the track that's on this record, Home is Where the Heart Lies, is probably the last thing we actually recorded together in the studio.
Neil Barber, Elephant Noise.
At the time, I mean, I was in my 20s, I thought I was a prophet. I find lyrics a lot easier. Whereas now, I work with a producer in Nashville, and we write commercial material. So he sends me, you know, hey Neil, I need something that sounds a bit like this, that has this content, that has this sort of flavour. And I find that a lot easier because there's a craft to songwriting, and there's an art to songwriting. The art is something you do when you're in your 20s and you're throwing it out. But as you get older, even looking at songs again. When I was writing in my 20s, I would write a song and that would be it. It'd be yesterday's song. Whereas now I can go back to things and I can tweak them and I can, oh no, that middle eight could be a little better here, and you have more craft as a songwriter.
Steve Brown, Seeing Red.
In fact, the first song we wrote was Take Me On. It was a ballad. I'd actually taken some music that I'd already written. Even there was one song which became Angel in Seeing Red, which was the exact same music that I'd written with Political Asylum. There's a track on one of the Political Asylum albums called Standing Over Me. If you listen to that and then you listen to Seeing Red's Angel, it's the same music. You just put our own lyrics. So I was always coming up with riffs and bits of music, and I'd work with a singer. So in Political Asylum, it was Ramsey who supplied the lyrics and vocal melodies, and then with Angie, it was she did the lyrics and the vocal melodies. So it was always to be an original band from day one.
With the recording sessions underway, the next order of business was to arrange a Glitzy Showcase to launch the album. The project continued to roll forward, and the showcase morphed into an all-day alternative rock festival. An exhibition aimed at budding musicians was bolted on, and that brought together specialists from all over the country, including the Musicians Union, the Performing Rights Society, and further education colleges offering full-time music performance and production courses. The festival would be held back in their native Fife inside the historic Adam Smith Theatre in Kirkcaldy. It would feature sets across the day from all of the bands who had recorded a session. The venue's 475-seat auditorium was a significant upgrade from the scale and type of venues that Smithfield Entertainments had built their reputation upon. Jim Russell, Smithfield Entertainments.
In some ways, that's a great thing about when you're younger. Your lack of experience, which probably would gauge you to more caution in later life. You kind of don't have that experience, so you tend to jump right into things. Of course, we did do some calculations, some plans. We knew the cost of the recording, the production for getting the album produced and things. But I think it was more a passionate kind of journey, that it's something that we wanted to do. It sounded cool. We thought we had the talents and skills to pull it off, and to hell with the consequences.
Ian Harrower, Smithfield Entertainments.
I think there was a real mystery to the recording industry, which intrigued us, and I think that was there was a certain magical quality to let's go down this rabbit hole, because that looks really exciting. So I think the energy of being younger, and I think that you had less financial commitments, so it was easier to be a risk taker
when you really didn't have that much to lose in the first place. We had an income stream coming in because on a good night where we had put on a gig, and punters had turned up, we had cash, so we were looking to go, right, how can we turn that into more cash? We never ever got an answer to that, but this idea that we could have our own record label, then that could lead us into something bigger than where we were. So it was no more than that. It was really a leap from a tall building, and the confidence and arrogance of youth would be that we'll be able to grow wings and we'll land okay, and so we just kind of got on with it. And the wonderful thing about working with musicians and creative people is everyone thought like that. Everybody was kind of a legend in their own practice room, with dreams that were way bigger than their actual experience. And so you kind of, there was a communal buying into that. And, we all thought, this time next week, Rodney, we were ever hopeful.
At this point in the story, a potential solution to all the financial and production challenges appeared in the form of an approach from the owner of an export-import company, who also had music ambitions and had formed his own record and publishing company. Ian Harrower, Smithfield Entertainments.
We met this chap who was called Bob Wilson, and he had a company called Wide Tracks Records. So his story was to us that he was Scottish, but he'd lived most of his life in the States, where he'd been a professional songwriter in Nashville. So he made a bit of money, and he was coming back to Scotland, and his plan was that he was going to start this record and publishing company. So what he wanted us to do was to release the album through his record company. And then all the songs on the album would be published through his publishing company. The second part of his business plan was, and it was 1991, and that's significant because the Berlin Wall had come down in 1989. So he had already built up a network in Eastern Europe. And so he continued his pitch to us by saying, what we should do is get all the bands over and touring Eastern Europe. And we would draw into Poland and we'll be playing football stadiums. And this is going to be like the new Klondike. And then he said, we won't always get paid in cash, but we might get paid in high-grade caviar and vodka, but that's okay because I've got an import-export company, and I'm guessing, I'm probably making this bit up, but when the vans are coming back, they'd be filled with caviar and vodka. So I kind of, for two naive people from Fife, this just kind of blew our mind. But he offered that he had all the contacts to get the CD produced and Eastern Europe and everything else. So the kind of negotiations started to move forward with this possible way that we could kind of do a deal with this guy and the album would be made available.
By the day of the musical festival, the Smithfield boys confidently predicted that the album would be available soon. Jim Russell, Smithfield Entertainments.
I can remember it being a bit of a nightmare, actually. I felt that Ian and myself and the Smithfield Entertainments crew, and the Adam Smith staff for that fact, did an excellent job. Everything ran like clockwork from our side. Unfortunately, the PA hire company, and again, this is my fading memory from 30 years ago, turned up 2 hours late. So, and then so the whole running schedule was behind time. And then they had some electrical problem with the desk, and people were getting kind of like, not electric shocks, but they were certainly getting an unpleasant sensation through the microphones at certain points in the show. So although it was generally regarded as a very successful event, from a logistics point of view, it was a bit of a nightmare. And again, I would like to think that through no fault of our own, but as they say, the show must go on, and it certainly did. And people had a great day. And from what I can remember, it was a sellout event, and everyone was happy.
Ian Harrower, Smithfield Entertainments.
I remember one of the lead singers decided that at one point he would take all his clothes off and run onto stage. And what we didn't appreciate that it was a laugh, but what we didn't appreciate is that actually it was against the law, and that the theatre could have lost its license because of that. So the theatre manager was a bit upset, and I can remember standing in the wings to go, how do you get this naked rock and roll singer off the stage, discreetly without the big hook coming into so it was just one of the many features of the day.
A final push to release the album meant much more negotiations with Wide Tracks, but a deal hit the rocks over questions about licensing, copyright and contracts. In addition, fractures began to appear within the bands, and the Smithfield boys found out that their roster of talent, who had recorded the original sessions with such high hopes, was quickly shrinking. Ed and Ped, Roy G. Biv.
Point where everybody has their input, and some people, and then it causes friction, and it happens in all bands.
Yeah. You get musical differences, and you get personality clashes at times, because you spend so much time with each other that you end up sort of like small things can annoy you, and it can grow, and you're not old enough or sophisticated enough to be able to sort it out. So you end up sort of like people start getting annoyed or to pick up the wrong, meaning to something. So
I personally think you need those clashes to make a good band.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a healthy band is full of sycophants. You need people that disagree with you. It's healthy for people to disagree with you.
And so, at some unremembered date in 1993, Smithfield Entertainments quietly faded out, and everyone moved on to different life stages and business projects. The defunct master tapes were thrown into a box or a drawer, eventually forgotten, and ultimately lost for all time. Or so it was thought. Earlier during the lockdown in 2020, however, a copy of the original master tapes turned up, recovered by the former studio owner and sound engineer Dave Gray, and lurking in a cardboard box at the bottom of a dusty storage cupboard in his home. And so, in October 2020, emerging from lockdown and the ravages of a worldwide pandemic, the Lost Cafe Sessions is finally available to the world. Digitally remastered, the 30-year-old sessions can now be streamed across all the digital music platforms. All the monies raised will go direct to Siblings Reunited, a registered charity based near Cooper in Fife that provides safe play space and together time for siblings across Scotland who are separated within the Scottish care system. 30 years after the original sessions were recorded, all motives and ambitions re-examined, memories stirred and friendships and moments remembered, the Lost Cafe Sessions are finally available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Deezer, Apple, YouTube Music, and many, many more. Jim Russell, Smithfield Entertainments?
I think, of course, first of all, it's been kind of like an itch that we've needed to scratch for the last 30 years. It's one of the great unfinished projects that that really needed some attention, just to draw a line under it, successful or not, just to say that it was completed. Of course, the other side of it is, looking back 30 years ago when I was a young man, and we were really busy with all the gigs and organizing this album and this type of thing. And not only was Smithfield Entertainments, a career path for me, but it also became really the center of my social life as well. And many of the bands that we worked with and the band members became really, really close friends. And we spent a huge amount of time with them. And as we look back now, 30 years on, the sad recollection is that some of those people are no longer with us and have, unfortunately died since, obviously at young ages over that period of time. One personal connection for me was the lead singer of Seeing Red, who we knew as Angie Cobb, and she married and became Angie Townsend, who was not only an incredibly talented, charismatic and fun-loving person, but also, as I say, a really great friend. And unfortunately, we heard, some time ago that she had, she'd had a terminal diagnosis, which was terrible. And Angie unfortunately died a couple of years ago from a long struggle with breast cancer. So getting this album out was not only for a personal kind of goal, but also recognition and a memorial to those people. And for me, especially Angie. So yeah, that's a real personal thing for me. And I really hope that maybe her children and family, listen to the album and hear this podcast, and, brings them some kind of pride and recognition about what a great person Angie, their mum and wife, was.